Welcome. So this video is going to cover gender roles, domestic division labour and power relationships within contemporary society. Bit of a mouthful title, but what we're going to do in this short video, short maybe a bit optimistic, but we're going to go through the pack and we're going to just cover the key content and help you fill in the pack and check you're happy with the materials. Now, one of the things to keep in mind, and obviously one of the things I will recommend, is that I have also created a shorter summary video. So it's about 15 minutes long, but it covers the key theories, key thinkers, and where they fit in relation to this debate. And it could be helpful for any 20-mark questions or questions you might have on DDOL. So I would recommend you watch that video, potentially either after this one or as a bit of revision later in the week. Okay, so we're going to need our family packs. We're going to work from page 60 to 60. It'll be 69 really, because the last page is 70, 71 are revision tasks for you, but we'll cover the content that we would address normally in these videos. So first thing we need to know, what is going to come up in this topic? So we need to know about gender roles, which is who does what in terms of gender, who does what in the home, and what has happened to the roles of gender. Have they changed? What's gone on with them over time? We're going to think about domestic labour, so we'll talk about DDOL, so domestic division of labour, or domestic labour, so who takes responsibility for work around the home. Are relationships becoming more equal? And as the title mentioned, we're also going to talk about power relationships, so again, who has control in the family, who takes control of the family, who controls money. We're also going to touch on stuff like domestic violence, so as an example of power or a form of power and control. Now, when it comes to application of key debates, now this is an interesting topic. It does relate to a lot of what you have already covered or will cover in the rest of this pack. So theory, particularly, we have just done all the theories, or you have just done all the theories of the family. Now, DDOL is basically theory of the family. It's going to see the same thinkers, the same people, the same ideas. We're just now tailoring their arguments to fit the narrative of domestic work rather than the role of the family. Other topics we've covered, so childhood will have a role to play, so looking at how changes in childhood and changes in experience of childhood kind of relate to division of labour. We'll look at changes in gender role, so kind of has elements of feminism in there. We'll see policy, which we haven't covered yet, that will come up later, and family structures and family diversity, which is our next topic after, well, see, 2 topics time again. So it does have a lot of overlap with other areas of this topic. One of the big things about this is we call it a synoptic there we go, link. So most of this stuff, it relates to other topic areas. You can use this material elsewhere in an exam, in an essay question. You don't have to sort of stick to just this question area. Now, the first thing to think about is a little discussion point, is why do you think there is a gap in DDOL? Now, again, we can't have a discussion in the traditional sense we would in the lesson, but maybe have a think. Just pause the video for a couple of minutes, have a think by yourself, maybe ask a family member to have sort of maybe a discussion with you about why you think there is this division in division of labour. And so this article can give you a little bit of a background. So as it says here, use the materials we've covered to obviously think about, and also think about education, other topics we've covered, to think about this. So pause the video, have a think, and then we'll come back together. Now, as a stretch and challenge, there are some further reading articles here, which again I will leave for you to have a think about, and you can read those. And also I will also set some of these as part of the work this week to read in addition to this PowerPoint. So the first thing we've got to think about is the development of the housewife role. Now, again, sort of having a think, when did the housewife role appear? What was the notion of the housewife? What, really think back to industrialization. Women were no longer allowed to work, children couldn't work, women stayed at home to look after, men became the breadwinner. The housewife role was created at this point. Now, an ideal housewife, again, think, those stereotypical images of, they're good cooks, they're good cleaners, they're good mothers, they do everything and they just do as they're told. Ultimately, thinking back to Marxism, some of the feminism, this benefits men, benefits capitalism, patriarchy. So a lot of these arguments are going to repeat throughout this session, particularly the feminist arguments. Now, what I'd say is the video link at the bottom here, obviously I can't play it through this video presentation, but I would recommend obviously watching this video. It's a short comedy sketch, but it does reinforce some of the views about what a housewife should be. So again, these questions are thinking points you can have a think about and maybe discuss with parents or siblings or friends. Now, before we get into it a little further, I want to show you this Good Wife's Guide. Now, this is a really good starting point for thinking about what is the housewife role. Now, this is an extract from I think it was a home economics textbook or reading material that was given to girls in schools as a form of teaching, and there's some interesting elements to this. So I thought about the sort of the fourth one here: clear away any clutter. Make one last trip through the main parts of the house before your husband arrives. On the cooler months, you would start a fire, light a fire for him, so the house is warm and nice when he comes home. Not that you've been cold all day, but start a fire for your husband when he gets home. Prepare the children, so they're clean and presentable. Eliminate all noise from washers and dryers and vacuums, so it's a quiet house. So really tying back to that safe haven, that warm bath notion from functionalism and Marxism. I thought this is always a good one, this one here. So listen to him. You may have a dozen important things to tell him, but the moment of his arrival is not the time. Let him talk first. Remember, his topics of conversation are more important than yours. Make the evening his. Just below that. Never complain if he comes home late or goes out to dinner or other places of entertainment without you. Instead, try to understand his world of strain and pressure and his very real need to be at home and relax. So if your husband's out all night doing God knows what, don't have a go at him. He's got a hard life. He's working. Your goal: to try and make sure that your home is a place of peace, order, and tranquility, where the husband can renew himself in body and spirit. Don't complain if he comes home for dinner or stays out all night. Very similar to above. Make him comfortable. Arrange his pillow. Often take his shoes off. There we go. Speak in a low, soothing tone. Don't ask him any questions about his actions or integrity. Remember, he is the master of the house, and as such, will always exercise his will with fairness and truthfulness. You have no right to question him, and a good wife knows her place. Now, again, I know these seem quite comical, but imagine a girl sort of 14, maybe even 15, 13, 14, in school being taught this by teachers as an expectation of their life and their future. So again, quite an interesting set of ideas of what the housewife was expected to be. So again, think about this. Would these still be tolerated today? Would you expect your wife, or would you be annoyed if your husband expected this from you? So on page 60, there is a gap fill on the development of the housewife role. Now, again, I'd say pause the video for a short spell, have a go at the glossary, have a go at the gap fill, and then I'll go through the answers really, really quickly, and you can check yours off. Or, if you just want to go through this pack, just follow with the screen. So, prior to the rise of industrialization and factory production in the 19th century, the family was a unit of production. So it produced all that it needed, with greater equality between the genders in the family. However, industrialization led to the separation of paid work from the home. So again, moving from pre-industrial unit production families to urban unit consumption, we don't work in the home anymore. Women were initially part of the labour force, but were gradually excluded from the workplace as a result of the Factory Act, and eventually confined to the home with sole responsibility for housework and childcare, while men became the sole breadwinners. This enforced women's subordination and economic dependence on men. Functionalists such as Parsons claim that these are natural and biological roles based on physical traits and abilities, while others would argue the housewife role is a socially constructed notion. Although in the 20th century there was an increase in the number of women working, changing the status of women in society, and this is what became women's primary role. In addition, women who work are concentrated in low-paid jobs, which are an extension of the housewife role, such as nursing, secretarial work, or childcare. So this is how the housewife role came to be. Now we've got some key definitions for the bottom page 60, just for you to fill in. As I say, I'll explain them very briefly, but just pause the screen and write your definitions in. So the first one is gender roles. Now gender roles are patterns of behaviour that we expect from either sex. So how we expect men and women to behave, and that's obviously linked to biological sex, and there is an element of social construction within these. So again, the idea of what we expect a man and woman to do. That's a gender role. A domestic labour is just unpaid housework. So cooking, cleaning, childcare, the work around the home, that's domestic labour. And the domestic division of labour is the way in which those jobs are divided up. So this whole topic is about the domestic division of labour. So ultimately, who is doing the housework in the home? So division of these tasks are often influenced by gender roles, expectations of men and women, and they change as society changes. A lot of what we see in this topic is how gender roles have changed over time, and that's changed the division of domestic work in the home, with some people saying it's got better, some people saying it's remained unequal. And last but not least, we have some concepts like conjugal roles. So conjugal roles are the activities and chores completed by men and women in a marriage. So effectively marriage roles. So who does the what job? So joint conjugal roles of both men and women have shared domestic work and will participate in housework equally. Segregated roles or conjugal roles is that men and women do not share domestic work and they participate in separate roles. So this is obviously traditional families where men would go to work and women would stay at home and do the housework. That would be a segregated conjugal role. Most families today opt for more joint conjugal roles. Now, just thinking about conjugal roles and how they're divided, there's a little task here for you to think about. Now, you can think about your own two-parent family, or it could be any two-parent family, and you can maybe just think about how are these tasks divided, and you think, is it majority male tasks, is it majority female, or is it shared? So again, you can go through and you can just sort of put a little tick across for your own family. So for example, when you think about mine, cooking meals is shared, but washing plates and dishwasher, mainly my job. Ironing is shared, fixing broken things like a block sink, mostly my job. Cleaning the bathroom is a shared job. Vacuuming, I think it's probably shared. Gardening doesn't really apply because we don't have a garden. Painting, decorating would be shared. Looking after sick family members, we kind of share those as well. Disciplining the children, probably more my other half. I'm a bit of a soft touch. Taking children to and from school is shared, and playing with children is shared. So in our home, or in my home, conjugal roles are probably more joint or shared. But again, think about your own family or the family you're considering, and think about these as just an example about whether division of labour is equal in your home. So what you've got on page 61 and 62 are some articles to read, which I think are really interesting for just thinking about the division of labour. And I'd say have a read of them. You can pause the video, have a read. There are some questions at the bottom 61 and midway through 62, which you can have a read and attempt of. I'm going to put the answers up on the screen in a second, just so you can check the answers you've come up with. So here are the answers to the first set of questions on page 61. There we go. So pause the screen if you want to add those in. And then here are the questions for the second answers to the second lot of questions on 62, which again, you can pause and add in. So let's move into the theories and the arguments for division of labour. So we're going to go through a number of arguments about whether the family is equal or unequal. Now, in each case, read through the material in your pack on about what each theorist has to say. Then you've got the criticisms which will appear, which you can add in, and then we'll look at those arguments together. So the first argument you've got is Parsons. Now, Parsons, same from functionalism, pretty much the same view. Key things he's discussing is segregated conjugal roles. Men and women should have segregated roles. He links that to the biological differences of men and women, that men should adopt instrumental roles, the worker role, the breadwinner role, and women should adopt the expressive role, the caring, nurturing role. So that's Parsons' main argument. Now, the criticisms we've got of Parsons, there are two. So first argument is that he's outdated. He's talking about families in the 1950s when married women became full-time housewives, and this is not the case. We are in a post-modern society. Wilmot and Young, who we're going to see in a second, disagreed with Parsons that the family and its nature was changing. The criticism from feminism, which you can add to the bottom of page 62, is that, again, Parsons ignored the way women suffer from sexual divisions of labour, that women do all this unpaid housework, they have no economic power, it keeps them dependent on men, and this ultimately all comes back to serve patriarchy. So that's the main criticism from feminism. And as I say, feminists such as Oakley, who make this argument, they're going to pop up in a second. Now, argument 2 is from Wilmot and Young. Now, as I say, as always, just pause this at any point and have a read of the information on page 63. I realise that's wrong, isn't it? So 63. Now, they talk about how the family has become more symmetrical, exactly the same as what you would have saw in functionalism. Men and women have an equal participation in housework, paid work, and childcare. It's very much the march of progress. It suggests that families have become more egalitarian, and it's also linked to stuff like the family becoming more home-centred and privatised. So the fact that we spend more time at home leads us to becoming more equal in housework and labour. Now, they also talk about the emergence of the new man, which I think is also an interesting concept. The idea that the new man is more in touch with emotional, being sensitive, so it means they're more involved in family emotion work and providing care for children, support for relatives, and participation in housework. Now, some of the changes that have led to the growth of symmetrical families are here. So this is for the middle of page 63 as well. And again, you can pause this and add them in. But you've got changes in the position of women. So women get married and go out to work, or married women are now going out to work. You've got geographical mobility. So couples move away from the community they grow up in. They move away from their extended family. So whereas in the sort of the families that Parsons are talking about, where traditional roles existed, you would have had a strong family network of aunts and uncles and mothers-in-laws living nearby who could help with housework, and you would work together as a family on housework tasks. Now that's gone. Obviously, families have to become more sort of self-reliant. Technology has had a big role. Again, we're going to look at some theorists who suggest this later, that housework is now easier and quicker. And we have higher standards of living. So women bring in a second wage, homes are nicer, we can have more home comforts. And again, that just adds to the idea that we become more privatised. We spend more time at home because our homes are nicer. Now, as criticisms of their theory, which again, we don't need to put these in, there's no space for criticisms, but I just thought this is an interesting one you might want to put on a post-it note to stick in your pack. So the main criticism is, while there is evidence that there is more integration of roles in the family, in leisure time and decision making, housework, childcare, childcare does, or housework and childcare do still remain predominantly women's work. So while men are more involved in childcare, it's the fun stuff. So feeding, bathing, playing games, but they're less likely to be doing the sort of more complex or more involved childcare tasks, like nappy changing and feed, sorting them out, emotion work. So men are more involved, but only in certain ways. So it's a criticism of what they suggest. Now this brings us to Oakley, our third argument, that says conjugal roles are still unequal, and she disagrees with both Parsons and Wilmot and Young. Now predominantly she's a criticism of Wilmot and Young, so this idea of jointness, this symmetrical family, these joint conjugal roles. She says that Wilmot and Young over-exaggerated the extent of this process, and what she's said that, of the married men, 72% claim to help their partner within the home in some way other than putting washing up at least once a week. Now what Oakley points out is this could mean vacuuming once a week, or tucking the children into bed, or making their own breakfast. So putting your plate in the sink and hanging up some washing once a week does not make you an equal participant in housework. So that's Oakley's challenge to Wilmot and Young's claim. Now Oakley, again, page number is wrong there, that's should be 63. Also makes the point that women are, conjugal roles are still segregated, they're unfair, that women are oppressed by patriarchal inequality, and that women suffer a dual burden. So women are doing paid work and housework, so they have this double burden to deal with. So Oakley's method, her sampling technique, was that she interviewed 40 women, half were middle class, half were working class. They were all aged 20 to 30, all lived in London, all had one child under the age of 5. Now we can think about her results, and again, there's no space in the pack or questions on these, but thinking about what she did, she, 15% of the husbands had a high level of participation. 25% had a high level in childcare. Now we could question what does a high level mean? That's quite a subjective term. A high level of homework for you guys might be, if I give you an hour and a half's worth of homework, that could be a high level. For me, that's an average level. For the college, that is not a high level. College sort of suggests you should be in 5 hours a week. So it's a subjective term, it's not measured. Obviously the other problem is the sample is quite small. It's unrepresentative. They're all based in London, they're all of a particular age group. Also, if the women had more than one children, the husbands may be involved more. If they've all got children under a certain age, they're more likely to be at home, where they'll be more likely to be doing more housework than their partner. Now, argument 4, just on the top of page 64, is Duncan and Marsden, who are kind of Oakley +1. So they talk about the labour and love and a triple shift. So what they say is that women have to do paid work, they do housework, they also have to do all the emotion work, all the labours of love. So they have 3 care roles and therefore a triple shift. So have a read of page 64 just to have a look at their arguments. Guernsey, also on page 64, talks about changes in gender role. Now this is a good one. So Parsons was unequal, but that's normal. Wilmot and Young was saying it was equal because it's changed. Oakley and Duncan and Marsden are saying it's unequal, or division of labour is unequal, and Guernsey's the one in the middle, talk about lagged adaptation. The conjugal roles are not yet equal, but are becoming equal. Now their argument is lagged adaptation. So if you imagine this, we kind of do a little bar graph here. Now over time, if we sort of imagine, sort of do paid work, and we've got house work. Oh, that's very scribbly. But if you imagine women, so women's paid work. So as women do more and more paid work over time, there we go, their paid work is increasing. And then what will happen over time is that men will do more housework, but the notion of lagged adaptation is that men are slower on the uptake. So the idea being that eventually, as women do more paid work, men will do more housework, but it's a slower rate of increase. So that's the lagged adaptation, and that again fits in the argument of becoming equal because men are starting to do more but are slower on the uptake. Okay, so just some evidence here, some changing generations of sort of ideas about housework and divisions of labour. And then on the bottom page 64, you've just got a summary. Now again, there's the summary video that I created, which you can watch after this one or as a conclusion, which will help with page 64's table. And last but not least, we're kind of getting to our last argument. So we've got Dunn. Now Dunn is an interesting one because she looked at lesbian couples. So she looked at lesbian couples and said that they have joint conjugal roles. They are unlike heterosexual couples, and they have shared roles because they lack what she called gender scripts. So as a sort of thinking about why there are no gender scripts in these families, you know, you've got two, or in Dunn's case, she only looked at lesbian couples, but you've got two women. So there's no assigned role of housewife role and husband role. So there's a degree of negotiation. They choose who is going to take on the role. So again, it's a sign of equality, but it only really applies to same-sex lesbian couples. As an update to Dunn, she looked at mothering, and again, she studied 97 mothers and fathers, and found that the lack of gender scripts allowed lesbian couples to explore new ways of parenting. So again, it's not just housework, but childcare. It's a greater flexibility in how it's done. And then lastly, postmodernism. So postmodernists again say that there's been a change in society, more diversity, and this creates more choice, and therefore we're seeing people choose alternatives to traditional breadwinner and housewife role or joint conjugal roles. So there's a greater negotiation and flexibility. So I would say have a read of these two kind of key arguments. Now there's a link for the article on page at the top of 66. So this is in the PowerPoint. So again, an article which can be used for the Sociology Beyond the Classroom on the top of 66. And then just some other sort of key points about that. You know, greater choice has led to more opportunity for relationships. Then last but not least, just a few kind of points here. So you've got some articles looking at globalization. Now globalization is the idea that the world has become smaller, more interconnected, or not physically small, but it feels smaller, more interconnected because of technology, transport, communication, trade. And this has affected how divisions of labour take place. So I would say read the articles on page 66 through to 68. The questions for those articles will appear on the screen here. So for article 1 on page 66, you've got question 1. And then for the questions on page 67, there's those 6 answers. Again, you can add those in. And then the questions on page 68 you can attempt on your own. So this moves on to the next bit about power. Now again, this sort of key point here I want to sort of flag up is that when we move into power relationships, we're not talking about housework, who is doing what in the home. We're talking about who makes decisions, who controls the family. That's the key difference between power and division of labour. Now, there's a couple of arguments. We're going to just fly through them. You can read them in your pack and then just sort of overview them in your own time. So the first one is Edgell. Now, Edgell talks about decision making. Who makes the key decisions in the home? Who makes the decision about what should be done and those kind of key points? And what Edgell says is that traditionally men made those important decisions. Men made decisions about buying houses, going on holiday. They were the really important ones. Joint decisions were then ones where women were involved. So that might be about sort of big decisions like the children's schooling and education, and then women took priority for the least important decisions, which was stuff like, you know, buying food and children's clothes. Now, the big thing in here, the big element that makes this purpose or this decision making unequal is money. I think money is the key factor here. Whoever controls the money controls the ability to make decisions. And in most cases, traditional families, men controlled the money. They had the money, they can make decisions. I think what's worth recognising as society changes and becomes more equal and women into the workforce, women have greater financial power in a family. So Ed Gell, obviously, he's writing in the 1980s when there would have been a greater financial power imbalance. In our, you know, now we're in 2020, you know, we're seeing that, you know, there, you know, we're looking at 40 years change. So I think we can maybe criticise Ed Gell on that in a postmodern society that we're in now, this has probably changed. So again, just some kind of interesting points there. Now, for the article on page 67 at the above, I'm not sure why it's popping up here. There we go. Then we've got Fallon Voger on 69 at the top, talking about money. And again, power and decisions being made does come back to money. Now, Fallon Voger talked about this idea of a couple of ways. So in the past, men controlled all the money. That was men's prerogative to have the money, control it. There was then the shift to the pooling system. So where men and women, so if we say this is obviously the women's money, the men's money, and then they'd have their joint pot. And what would happen is they'd both chip in to a joint pot, and that's where all their money would be contained, and they'd share that. And so Fallon Voger are quite good for, you know, traditionally there was an imbalance, but it's become more equal as couples pool their resources. So it's kind of shifts from unequal to sort of somewhere becoming equal. And then you've got Weeks, who also, sorry, Smarts and Weeks, who talk about co-independence, which again is another argument for greater equality. Now, last but not least, because I know we're not getting into this video now, so the last little bit is Dobash and Dobash and Donovan, so bottom of 69. So again, domestic violence is a good example, sorry, not a good example, it's an example of inequality in power. So for Dobash and Dobash, domestic violence is a source of power, men using patriarchal power against women. And statistically, we know that 1 in 4 women will experience domestic violence in their lifetime for women. And then for men, it's 1 in 6. Now, 10 years ago, that was 1 in 7. So obviously that shows there's been a greater change. More men are experiencing domestic violence now than in the past. So that could be, in a very odd way of looking at it, a step towards equality, that men are experiencing or beginning to experience domestic violence on a greater level than in the past. So that could be a very bad example, but it's a step towards equality between men and women. But again, this is used to show the inequality between men and women. Donovan also talks about how material factors, money, has a role to play. So lack of money creates financial stress, and that can increase risks of domestic violence. And then you've got a task at the bottom of 69 to just do a little bit of research and get some stats on domestic violence. Now, page 70, there are some consolidation tasks which you can crack on with and have a go at doing. Page 71 has some summary tasks about relationships being egalitarian. What I would say to help with that is watch the summary video that I've created in addition to this presentation. And then you've got the glossary on 72. Now, there are some research tasks here, which again, you may want to take part in. If you've got some time, you want to have a go at them, feel free to do that. Just say pause this video and take a look at this in yourself. So, first thing here is this exam question as a 10 marker. Now, again, I'm not going to sort of let this PowerPoint run through for 10 minutes and have the question going, but I thought we'd look at the question. There are two ways in which women's involvement in paid work has affected family structures. Now, this is an odd question to flag up here because this has got there's no obvious connection to DDOL, but this is the tricky thing about family 10 markers. They don't have a clear link to topics. So women being involved in work does have an impact on DDOL, and that's why I've put it here, but also with family structure. So you could talk about Wilmot and Young and the symmetrical family. You could talk about Guernsey and lagged adaptation. So some of the topics we've talked about could appear in this question. Although it's not specifically a DDOL question, we could use DDOL within it. skip that. And then last but not least, the 20 marker, which is more specific to DDOL. So this is to evaluate the view that the division of labour and power relationships in couples are equal in modern family life. And so this would be an argument of putting all the points that say it is equal, so family life has become equal, versus all the arguments to say that it's not equal. And again, if you think about the is equal, we can put people like Weeks, we could mention thinkers like Silver and Score, we can talk about postmodernism, we could use Dunn. So there's quite a few arguments that show the division of labour is equal. We've also got a number of people who say that it isn't equal. So Oakley, Parsons, Duncan and Marsden, Edgell, so those arguments, Dobesh and Dobesh, that division of labour, because obviously it's power relationships and division of labour. So there's two things to talk about. But then we've also got the kind of the middle ground, those kind of not too sure thinkers. So which again could go either way. So this would be like Guernsey, Fallon, Vogler, the thinkers that say things are improving but they're not equal yet. Again, to help with this question, I would say watch the separate summary video that I've produced. That would be a really good summary of condensing this down. Okay, and that is domestic division of labour complete. Now on page 73, the very last thing, there is a 10-mark question for you to plan. And what I think I will do is I'll check with Joe, but I might set this as our task for this week. Okay, any problems, any questions, get in touch with us at any time. And thanks for watching. I know this has been a slightly longer video. Right, take care.